A 2011 study estimates that somewhere between 500,000 and 8 million people died during the Cultural Revolution, making it one of the most devastating political upheavals of the 20th century. But to understand how China descended into a decade of violence, purges, ideological warfare, and national chaos, we need to go back long before 1966. The Cultural Revolution was not a sudden event. Instead, it was the result of decades of political change, revolutionary ambition, economic struggle, and deep ideological conflict within China and between China and the rest of the world. Mao Zedong's vision for China, shaped by personal ideology and political insecurities, collided with the rapidly changing global landscape of the post-World War II era. This collision created a crisis unlike anything China had experienced before. The story begins in 1921, a year that marked a turning point in the development of modern Chinese politics. A wave of Chinese intellectuals, students, and dissatisfied citizens were searching for a new direction. After generations of foreign domination, internal disorder, economic weakness, and political fragmentation, many young thinkers were inspired by the ideas of Marxism and Leninism. They believed capitalism, with its class divisions and global imperialist tendencies, had failed China and allowed foreign powers to exploit the country. These radicals rejected the liberal ideals promoted by Western nations and instead turned to revolutionary socialism as a path to independence and equality. Their efforts led to the founding of the Chinese Communist Party (CPC). At the same time, there was a significant shift in how political ideas were communicated. Instead of using elite academic language, early communist leaders adopted a more colloquial and simple style of speech so that peasants and workers could understand their message. This change made their ideas more accessible and encouraged youth involvement. Young people, who were often frustrated by China's instability, became central to the growing movement and would eventually become the driving force behind the Cultural Revolution decades later. By the mid-1940s, the CPC had grown much stronger. In 1945, a new and powerful leadership structure emerged within the party. One key feature was the creation of the position chairman of the Communist Central Committee, the highest authority in the CPC. Mao Zedong, already the chairman of the Politburo, was given this title as well, cementing him as the most influential figure in the party. After World War II, China plunged into another round of civil war between the CPC and the Nationalist Party, the Kuomintang KMT. After years of intense fighting, the Communists emerged victorious. On October 1, 1949, Mao Zedong stood in Tiananmen Square and declared the birth of the People's Republic of China. The CPC had succeeded in its goal of building a new socialist nation, but the problems that lay ahead were vast: rebuilding the economy, restructuring society, and eliminating opposition. To understand the Cultural Revolution, it's important to consider what was happening around the world during the 1950s. The Soviet Union, China's closest ideological ally, experienced major turmoil after the death of Joseph Stalin on March 5, 1953. The transition of power was uncertain. Eventually, Nikita Khrushchev emerged as the new Soviet leader and openly criticized Stalin's brutality and oppressive rule. While Mao also disliked some of Stalin's excesses, he was deeply alarmed by Khrushchev's softer, more reform-oriented approach. Mao believed that the Soviet Union was becoming revisionist, meaning it was abandoning true communist principles. These global changes made Mao worry that China might head in the same direction, that future leaders might weaken the revolution. This fear would later fuel his decision to purge political rivals and reignite revolutionary spirit through the Cultural Revolution. In 1956 and 1957, Mao made a surprising move. He encouraged Chinese citizens to freely express their opinions, criticize the government, and offer new ideas for improvement. He famously declared, "Let 100 flowers bloom, let 100 schools of thought contend." At first, intellectuals were unsure whether Mao was sincere. But once they began speaking openly, they criticized corruption, inefficiency, censorship, and political extremism. Mao's reaction was swift and harsh. He reversed his stance almost immediately, labeling critics as rightists and enemies of the state. Thousands were silenced, punished, or sent to labor camps. Whether Mao truly believed in openness at first, or if he had planned the crackdown to expose dissenters, remains debated. But the result was clear. By 1957, Mao had eliminated many of his political opponents, tightening his grip on power. China's economy had been in ruins due to decades of warfare and instability. To rebuild, Mao launched the first 5-year plan in 1953. The goal was industrial growth, increased production and modernization. Although progress was made, it became clear by 1957 that China's economy was still far from achieving Mao's ambitious goals. Party officials realized that China needed rapid industrialization on a massive scale. This led directly to one of the most disastrous campaigns in world history, the Great Leap Forward. Beginning in 1958, Mao and the Chinese government launched the Great Leap Forward, an attempt to rapidly transform China into a self-sufficient industrial and communist society. Millions of farmers were forced off their land and into massive collective farms known as communes. Traditional family structures were dismantled. Huge numbers of people were ordered to produce steel in makeshift backyard furnaces, while agricultural production was ignored or poorly managed. The policies were based more on ideology than practical planning. As a result, farming collapsed. Food shortages spread across the country. The government continued exporting grain and reporting false success, worsening the crisis. Between 15 and 55 million people died, making this one of the largest man-made disasters in human history. Mao was blamed for the failure and gradually pushed out of direct control. While he remained chairman of the CPC, true political power shifted to more moderate leaders. But Mao was not ready to fade into the background. He would soon return with a plan to reclaim authority and reshape China once again. The Cultural Revolution lasted roughly from 1966 to 1976, a full decade of political upheaval, social chaos, and economic disruption in China. Its end came gradually and was closely tied to the declining health of Mao Zedong, the exhaustion of the population, and the failure of radical policies to sustain the economy or governance. By the early 1970s, China was facing widespread disorder. Schools and universities had been largely shut down, industries were underperforming, and different factions of Red Guards were often in conflict with each other. Even the People's Liberation Army had to intervene at times to restore basic order. Mao's health was deteriorating, which meant he could no longer actively direct the radical movements, giving moderate leaders like Zhou Enlai and eventually Deng Xiaoping more influence. A key turning point came with the death of Lin Biao in 1971, Mao's chosen successor, in a mysterious plane crash after allegedly plotting a coup. This event shocked the country and undermined the credibility of radical leaders, weakening support for the Cultural Revolution. When Mao Zedong died on September 9, 1976, the movement effectively lost its driving force. Within a month, the Gang of Four, Mao's radical allies led by his wife Jiang Qing, were arrested. Their removal marked the formal end of the Cultural Revolution, as the Communist Party moved to restore order, stabilize the government, and repair the economy. After the Cultural Revolution, China underwent a period of reconstruction and reform. Schools and universities reopened, intellectuals and officials who had been purged were gradually rehabilitated, and Deng Xiaoping eventually implemented economic reforms that shifted China toward modernization and capitalism, marking a clear break from the extreme policies of Mao's last decade. In short, the Cultural Revolution ended because Mao's death, arrest of the Gang of Four, and the country's exhaustion with chaos removed the leaders and forces that had sustained it. The nation then slowly began the long process of rebuilding politically, socially, and economically.